Hello, I'm Robert Sanders, and I'm talking to Sue Palmer, who is an author and chair of the Upstart Scotland Campaign. Hello, Sue.
Hello.
Hi. So before we find out more about your campaign, tell me, what is your mission in life?
Yeah, you put this one on me first thing this morning through an email, and I sat there thinking, oh, crikey. And I realized actually I've had 3 missions, absolutely driving missions. And the very first one was way back in about 1967 when I was at university. And if you remember 1967, it was the age of the hippie. So we were all a bit, sort of hippie-ish then. I was a bit of a sort of semi-hippie. And there was one occasion when my boyfriend had taken me to a party, and it was a bit taking drugs and things, and I wasn't absolutely sure. So I disappeared into the kitchen, and there was a book lying on the table. It was called An Experiment in Education by Sybil Marshall. And I picked that up and sat in a corner thinking, I'll just read this for a bit and see what happens. Anyway, party went on. There was a bonfire out in the garden. They were all out there setting themselves free. I was just gripped by this book. This woman was amazing. She was a mother of a small child and a former teacher. And it was just at the time of the war. And before the war, I don't know whether you know, but women, when they got married, they had to give up their job. But because the war came, the men went away. Suddenly she was asked with this little baby to go and take over this little country school in the Fens. And she arrives, and the poor children had been horribly neglected. And they were either absolutely kicking off all the time and ungovernable, or just like the light had gone out in their eyes. And she'd got this gaggle of kids of different ages in this school and didn't know what to do about it. And then thought, well, I think let's do art and music. I love music and I love art. Let's do that and see how it goes. So that was what she did. And the book was the story of how these children just came back to life and became absolutely, but the final project she did was on Beethoven's 6th Symphony. And they all listened to the bit that's pastoral. So they were country kids, so they sort of got a bit about that. And then they did these paintings and they did these poems, and it was just, and I just sat there in a corner of this room and thought, I want to be Sybil Marshall. And that was it. So that became my driving mission. I had to get a small country school somewhere and do that. So I dropped out of university, and by 1970 I was in Edinburgh. My boyfriend, who I married, got a job there, and I went to the College of Education, Murray House, and I got my primary teaching diploma, and I became a teacher in Edinburgh, and then I became the head teacher of a small country school on the banks of the River Tweed, and I got to do it, and we had a blissful time. It was absolutely, we had a wonderful time. And yeah, I loved education, but the thing that I'd sort of learned through working with the kids was they weren't all as good at reading and writing. As you know, some of them were brilliant and some of them weren't, so they found it harder. And I wanted to know more about it, because for me, reading and writing had always been my life. I mean, I've been reading and writing ever since I can remember, and I just love them. And the joy of actually expressing yourself through words on a page. So my interest had suddenly gone to, what is it about, why are some children not so good at it as others? And that ended up with me going back to university to find out. I did a master's in language and literacy in Manchester, and then ended up on a second marriage now, with a baby. Me and Sybil with me thinking, right, I've got to do something like anyway. I decided to call myself a reading and language consultant. I got lots of writing work. I was already been writing school books for a wee while with colleagues in Edinburgh, but now I started doing my own. I started taking in pupils. It was a time of the real dyslexia boom. You know, people didn't know whether there was such a thing, and there were all these poor kids. So I was working with children at home, and I was doing that. and did loads of writing, and in the end ended up on the road because I created a roadshow called the Language Live Roadshow, which I took around the country, and it was about the sheer joy of spelling and punctuation. I know that doesn't sound like much to other people, but I just wanted to make it fun, and we had a brilliant time again. Had a lovely time on the road, and in the evening, during the day I'd do the kids' spelling roadshow and a punctuation roadshow, and then in the evening I'd do a meeting for the teachers called Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Grammar But Never Dared to Ask. As teachers, but that time hadn't had a lot of grammar education. And as a result of that, I got discovered by the BBC, and I ended up writing BBC grammar programs and then became their consultant. And I'd also, because I was traveling around seeing schools, I was writing for the Times Educational Supplement a lot too, because you know, I could tell them interesting things that were going on around the country. And I was working for various other organisations, publishers, and things like the National Literacy Trust and Basic Skills. And by 1998, I was doing an awful lot of traveling because my daughter was big enough to leave behind. And I was asked by the Times Educational Supplement to interview this woman called Sally Ward, who was a speech and language therapist in Manchester, and who had got really startling data on the deterioration of children's listening skills over 15 years. And as a result of that, I started thinking, this is one of the reasons why not only is there a difference between children's reading and writing skills, but it's actually a growing gap. And it's nothing to do with how we teach them to read and write, to do with children and their development, particularly in early life. So 1998, I was 50 by this time, and this became the date of my next mission, which was that I had to find out about this and try and work out what you did. And so I did a book, lying around somewhere. Yeah, it was called Toxic Childhood. It came out in 2006. And it was about child development and what they need to grow up healthy and able to learn and have lots of lifelong well-being, but also about the way that modern culture and our 21st century lives impacts on that. And by this time, I was also doing loads of talks with teachers and parents about this. And I started feeling guilty because I'm telling them all the things that are going wrong, but I'm not telling them any solutions. And that was when I ended up writing another book called Upstart, the case for raising the school starting age and giving the under sevens what they really need. And out of that book, in the Upstart campaign, and that is my mission in life, to create a relationship-centered, play-based kindergarten stage for children between the ages of 3 and 7. We're trying for it up here in Scotland. I think it would be much, much more difficult in England, because I'm afraid in England they've got Ofsted, and unless teachers try really hard, the fun and the joy is going out of education more every day. So, you know, things aren't wonderful up here because I think we've all got a bit too preoccupied with tests and targets, pushing children through education as though it's some sort of a race. And we've actually forgotten about the importance of childhood. So that was a long answer, sorry.
Yeah, no, but yes. So the Upstart Scotland campaign and Play is the Way. So tell me more about how those are happening and what's going on with those.
Well, we've been going for 5 years now, and I think there's a real will, in fact, in many ways in Scotland, to move towards a much more, I mean, what's happened over the last 30 odd years is the decline of outdoor active social play, which is absolutely vital, not only for children's well-being, long-term well-being, but also for laying the foundations of learning. There's 2 big things that are really necessary in children's early life to lay strong foundations for lifelong learning and well-being. And one of them is play, which comes from the children. And one of them is love, which comes from the adults. So as long as children have got loving, caring relationships with adults who really, really are not judging them, they're not saying, oh, come on, you've got to pass this test. They're basically saying, you know, I'm interested in what you've got to say, and I'm interested in helping you. And the children get lots of play with other kids, preferably outdoors and as often as possible in nature. The vast majority of children by the age of 7 or 8 will have developed all these foundational capacities, things like their speaking and listening skills. I mean, one of the things that the grown-ups need to do for the listening particularly is lots of singing and music. Sybil had it right there. And lots of stories, but also those opportunities for the children to discover things through their play and want to talk about them. So there's speaking and listening, but there's also resilience, emotional resilience, which comes from play, you know, making yourself little challenges and managing to do them and building up your capacity to bounce back from problems. And there's also, oh God, so many things: curiosity, love of learning, social skills, teamwork, problem solving, all these things. They're all in our DNA, but we need opportunities. But the big one for education is what they call self-regulation, the capacity to control your emotions and your behavior, your physical behavior and your social behavior. And most children, given a good grounding, will hopefully, by the time they're 7 or 8, be absolutely ready to learn. And that's, I mean, the lucky countries that start school when children are 7, you do see that much, much more than you do. Yeah.
Why do you think it's, you know, because it does happen quite a lot in other countries in Europe and the world, but so why is it that it doesn't seem to have taken place here?
Well, it was because of a decision taken in the Westminster government in the 1860s, which resulted in the Education Act 1870. Like most countries in Europe, we were introducing state education. But unlike most countries in Europe, we didn't go for age 6 or age 7 as being the most appropriate age to start. We went for the year children turned 5. And the reason for that was nothing to do with education. It was to do with the fact that there were a lot of children, because the parents were having to go to work in the factories, there were a lot of kids who were on the streets in danger. So it became a child protection issue. Let's get them into school as early as we possibly can so their parents can work in the factories. But there was a bonus there that if you got them in early, you could get them out the other end early too, and their parents, and they could go and work in the factories too. It was an economic decision. And back in the 1860s, even then, there were some parliamentarians saying this is too young, but it went through. So the 12% of countries in the world that start school that early are the vast majority of them are ex-British Empire, because other countries on the 5-year-old age as well. So this is a historical accident. No, it's not an accident, it was an economic decision. And we've all been sort of assumed, because that was the way it was, that, you know, it's like the sun rises in the morning and children go to school the year they turn 5. Totally unnecessary. And when you look at other countries where they have a kindergarten stage, the kindergarten movement started in Germany in the 1830s, and that's really, there's a huge amount of literature on what's the best thing for kids up to that age, which modern science is now backing up, attachment science and the new science of play. So we really do need to start thinking, our kids need a childhood.
Yeah.
And at the moment, they can't go out and play on, you know, because there's traffic. So that we've got to change our universal services to give them a childhood.
So do you think you're making progress in your mission, you know, and what
up to a point, Lord Copper, up to a point. We've got a huge amount of support from a wide range of, you know, professors of public health and commissioners for children and young people and people like that, social work, the arts, education for sustainability, because if kids aren't out in nature when they're little, they're not going to care about nature for the rest of their life. So we've got loads of support. But unfortunately, our government is, like everybody else, sort of assumed, you know, 5s when they start school. And back in 2015, our First Minister said, we're going to introduce testing regime in an assessment regime. They don't like the word testing, in Scotland. And we're going to start a baseline with them being assessed in the first year of primary 1, which is when. So we actually, while there's lots of movement towards outdoor education and things through the nurseries, as soon as they get in school, it's still very much the old-fashioned way. But we had an election this year. We did a book which came out last October, which is the way. And we actually did a crowdfunder to send a copy to every MSP. And I think as a result of that, there was a debate just at the end of the last Parliament. Beatrice Wishart, a Lib Dem parliamentarian, called a members' debate. And a lot of people spoke up very, very warmly about the idea of a kindergarten stage. And so 3 of our opposition parties put it into their manifestos. Now, that's the first time anything like this has ever gone into any manifestos in the UK. So 3 put a kindergarten stage: Labour, Lib Dem, and the Scottish Greens, bless them. So yeah, I think we're sort of making progress, but there's still this deep resistance because the government's now very committed to its new assessment, Scottish National Standardised Assessment Regime, and they're not going to want to change that. And as long as it's there, basically we can't have a proper play-based. It would be, I mean, we've shown in the book how it would be really quite easy to do it in Scotland if it weren't for entrenched.
So now we're sort of hopefully coming out of the pandemic, and you know, children back in school. What do you think is the priority for children's education now?
Well, I think right through, actually, it's the relationships and the opportunity for playful learning that we should be. That recovery is not going to depend on putting more pressure on children who have gone through a year and a half nearly of, well, it's not going away for a long time, is it? And these kids have been absorbing all sorts of frightening messages from the grown-ups in their lives, not intentionally, but everybody's been under stress. Some children have had a really traumatic time. If there's any time when we needed a kindergarten, it's now. But I think in general, this catch-up narrative it's putting more pressure on the kids. Oh, I've got to catch up with something. I mean, what have they got to catch up with? Just some dream that someone had that they do it this at this stage. No, they need to recover. The important thing is recovery, it's reconnection, that they really need lots of time with their friends. They need time to play. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of primary here because I'm not a secondary teacher, but in secondary, the sorts of pressures those poor kids have been put under with all these different assessment regimes and it's unbearable. That their resilience is going to be hugely affected. We have a mental health problem already among our children and young people, and unless we cut them some slack, it's going to get worse. Children learn when they're happy. Children learn when they're enjoying it, and that's what Sybil said all those years ago. And I know from my career that that's true. And if you can make it fun, but also they also now, because they're not naturally getting it in a way that children did in the past, they also need us to factor in opportunities from the very early stage of active outdoor play, which turns out to be a really, really important thing for long-term development.
Yeah. And what are your next steps, Sue?
We're doing another little book at the moment, and we'll just keep plugging on. I mean, we're not going away. We're going to keep plugging on, and there's we've got a terrific board for Upstart with marvelous people that are working very hard. So we'll just keep chugging away, and just, I think we've made slow progress.
Sue Palmer, thank you very much.
Thank you.